Hi, welcome to What About It podcast, our fifth episode. Tell me something. Have you ever had something that just sitting there waiting for you to act on it that needs your attention? A conversation you didn't finish, a decision that you didn't make, a follow-up that you never even sent, email, text, or a quick follow-up call. And it just sits. Not because you didn't care, and certainly not because you didn't know it was there, because you just didn't move. And then you tell yourself, I'll just get to it later. But later turns into longer than it was ever meant to be. And now it's just not sitting there. Now it has weight. And that's what we're here to talk about today. Because knowing something and doing something about it are two different things. In the last episode, we talked about Chime Nation community, and the idea that real insight comes from real experiences shared honestly, typically done through here. But insight alone doesn't really change anything. You can recognize a situation, and you can certainly understand it better than you ever have before, and still we can do nothing. And that's what this episode is all about. Because there's typically a gap most people don't want to talk about, except on here. And that's the gap between knowing and doing. We've all had those moments, including me. Something comes up, a conversation needs to happen, or a decision needs to be made, and it's typically an interruption we never expected. Something just sitting there that needs your attention, and you know it. And instead of stepping into it, you step aside. And just for now. And then you just tell yourself that you'll come back to it later. Well, we all know later turns into longer than it ever meant to be. Days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months, and now it's just not a situation anymore. Now it has weight. And so let's call it what it is. It's avoidance. And it's not necessarily obvious. It's not always intentional. But it sometimes looks like we're just busy. Sometimes it looks like needing more information or time. Sometimes it looks like it's waiting on someone else. But underneath it all, it's still avoidance. And the problem with avoidance is pretty simple. Nothing moves. The funny thing is, most situations don't fall apart because they were impossible to fix. They fall apart because someone just said, fuck it, 10 minutes too early. So let me ask you, when was the last time you did that? And so, what did you do? Well, you did nothing, or you moved it. Even if it's a small item, not too pressing, even if it's uncomfortable, even if you're not completely sure how it's going to land. Because progress doesn't necessarily come from perfect timing. That's for darn sure. It comes from engagement. And here's where most of us get stuck. They think movement means solving it, and it really doesn't. Movement means actually engaging in it. Reaching out, asking the question whether it's a difficult one or not, acknowledging that something has been sitting there a lot longer than it should have. Sometimes that's all it takes to break the stall, just a different mindset. Because silence creates distance in itself, and distance creates assumptions, and we all know assumptions usually turn out being wrong, causing more weight. So instead of guessing, just engage. Even if it's just a simple message, hey, this thing has been sitting on my desk longer than it should have. I haven't forgotten about it. Let's figure out how to move it forward. And that mind shift alone could move things, surprisingly. But here's the other side of this. Sometimes you can't move the needle. Not because you're avoiding it, and certainly not because you're not willing, because it's in someone else's hands. It's dependent on the people working on your behalf, people who you've asked for their time, people who are trying to get something across the finish line for you and for your answers. And in those moments, your role shifts considerably. You're not the one executing it. You're the one waiting. And waiting, as we all know, can be just as uncomfortable as acting. So what do you do then? You still stay engaged. You don't disappear. You don't assume it's being handled without pressure. You kindly remind them. Not aggressively, not impatiently for sure, but clearly and kindly. And let them know that their efforts haven't been forgotten and that you certainly appreciate their time. And at the same time, you just stay mindful of something else that's on your plate. It's not going to hurt. There are often people on the front line, people answering questions, people facing scrutiny, etc., especially those that you've asked to help you. Because timelines have a tendency to stretch beyond what we expected. And whether it's fair or not, they're the ones feeling it. And they're feeling it from you, maybe. So part of moving things forward, even when you're not one in control, is making sure communication doesn't break down. Those expectations are managed, that people know where things stand, and that no one is left guessing, especially us or you, because silence in those moments creates pressure in all the wrong places. This isn't a passive position. It's still action. It's just different kind of action. And it still requires grit, especially when those questions are difficult. Because staying engaged when you can't directly control the outcome, that in itself is pretty uncomfortable too. Now let me give you something real. A friend of mine, an engineer type, was looking to buying a second vehicle, pretty much the same one that he already drives, similar mileage, and yet he's stuck. He's an engineer, so he's overanalyzing friggin' everything. Ready to spend $200 just to have someone tell him it's a good buy or not. Why is he doing that? Because he couldn't find the maintenance records. So I asked him. I said, what about your vehicle? It's the same model, same friggin' mileage, roughly. And I know for a fact that it's well maintained properly, even more so because you're that kind of anal guy. So I told him, buddy, look at your own maintenance records. See what was done, when it was done, the mileage, and just use that as your baseline. The answer was already there. He just wasn't seeing it or using it. He was looking outside for something he'd already had from his own experience. And that's what we do in life all the time. We kind of overcomplicate things. We delay. We look for external validation or comfort instead of using what we already knew. It's just not that unusual to question our decisions before or even after they're made, and that in itself can be a little bit avoidance. Now bring that a little closer to home. Maybe it's business, something sitting with a client, a deal that stalled, a conversation that never got finished, an email that never got answered or responded to, and instead of following up, you friggin' wait. Now, you don't want to come off on the wrong way. You don't want to push anyone too hard, especially when they're acting on your behalf. So you simply say nothing or do nothing. Meanwhile, they're thinking you've disappeared, or worse, that you've already moved on or given up and said to hell with it. All because of that friggin' gap. And that's a difficult measurement in itself. That could have been closed with one simple message or a call. Or maybe it's personal. A conversation that didn't go right. Remember, fuck it? By the way, those are just sentence enhancers. Something said the wrong way, something taken the friggin' wrong way. And now there's distance. And instead of addressing it, you let time pass, hoping it smooths itself out. And it typically doesn't. Because unresolved doesn't mean resolved. It just means delayed. So again, what do? You move it. Not perfectly, not with all the answers, but with good intention. You reach out. You ask that question, whether it's a difficult one to ask or not. You create the opportunity for something to shift. Because if it's sitting there, it's not going to go away. And it's waiting for you to engage it. And yeah, sometimes that means stepping into something uncomfortable. That's where grit shows up again and again. So do the hard thing. And no, it's not easy. But I'll guarantee you it'd be worth it. Because if something feels uncomfortable, it's probably just the work. And it's about movement. So if you've got something now, perhaps a conversation, perhaps a decision that needs to be made, or a friggin' situation that you yourself have been sitting on, don't let it stretch longer than it needs to. Find a way to move it forward. Even if it's a small little gesture, small little step, because that first step changes everything. And if you're not sure how to take it, chime in. Visit our website at whataboutit-podcast.com. Share your situation. Share the question you're having difficulty in asking. Share the moment that you've been sitting on yourself. Because chances are, you're not the only one. And sometimes, hearing how someone else moved through it could very well be exactly what you need to take that step yourself. So what about it? Kiss you, Watson. Be kind. And thank you for listening in on What About It podcast. See you next time.